All right, this is a fun session. Let's talk about the dark arts here. My name's Mitchell. I work at AppsFlyer on our partnerships team. Today we're going to talk a little bit about fraud. But what I want to start off with is, you know, when you're working with networks, it's often a conversation you want to have with your partners on what is the difference between low quality traffic and what's the difference between what we can deterministically, without a doubt, say, hey, this is fraud. So what I want you guys to take away from this session is that if you're looking at UA, haven't started investing yet, or maybe you are, understanding that you know, what are the big types of fraud that are out there? How do we look at these anomalies and understand what is fraud, and, you know, understand how can we prevent fraud, how can we detect fraud, what does that mean? Do I got a clicker? Cool. So mobile advertising. This is an interesting point here. When you see that in 2017, with recent data, mobile advertising has actually surpassed web. So congratulations, we did it. Here in mobile. So basically what this indicates is that more mobile marketers are gaining more confidence. There's more fancy tools out there enabling marketers to really understand their business, to understand what's the impact of their advertising on their ROI. Maybe they're driving app installs and are understanding that when they drive an app install that someone's making a purchase on web, and they're really starting to understand that when they're investing in mobile, they're really starting to see that ROI over the lifetime value of the user. So we're really starting to see more app marketers get more and more sophisticated, and the networks as well getting more sophisticated in their ability to drive value for users. But as the ancient proverb goes, mo money, mo problems. As you start to see that the money's out there, the opportunity is out there for fraudsters to really take over. So the fraudsters use a variety of techniques, but at AppsFlyer we're at a unique position where we have 60% market share, where we're able to see 60% of the apps that are doing app install marketing as a mobile attribution and marketing analytics company. Our SDK is in around 98% of devices globally. So it really does put us in a unique position to see the fraud as it occurs, and see how the fraudsters are continuously evolving and continuously getting better at not just simulating clicks, not just simulating impressions, but simulating installs, and simulating engagement and retention as well. So how do we look at this? You know, what does fraud look like? And I want you guys to take away from this more confidence and understanding that, hey, if we're going to start investing a lot in growing our app and growing our business, we understand, we know what fraud looks like, and we know how to act on it quickly. So it's a global issue. It's not just in the US, Canada, Europe, where there's higher payouts for CPIs. We see this all over the world. And to be honest, when you've got fraudsters that are able to spoof IPs and use bad devices, they can really make themselves look like they're from anywhere, to be honest. So we're really seeing this as a global issue. So this brings up one of the more important pieces of my talk today, which is the prisoner's dilemma. You guys have probably seen this chart before, but basically what this means is if you have one network that is breaking the law, and one network that is actively trying to prevent fraud, actively trying to build tools around fraud to see, you know, how can we get better. It's going to be the network that is trying to fight fraud that's going to lose. So when you've got this prisoner's dilemma, it's like, what do we do to stop this? Especially when you get more modern types of techniques of fraud, which I'll go into here later in the discussion. We've got click flooding, click hijacking, device ID reset fraud, and all of these fancy types of techniques and tactics that fraudsters are using, where they're able to actually capture organic installs as installs that are driven by attributed networks. So when you're seeing installs that are organic, everyone loves organic installs, right? You know, those are typically users that are solid ROI, they're coming in, they're making purchases and things like that. When you have another network that's going out and trying to actually grow the business, trying to grow the business in terms of generating new actual users that have never heard about your app, you're paying for organic users in a lot of these cases, and the fraudster's happy because they drove the user. The attribution company's happy because they made an attribution. The network is happy because they drove that install. The marketer's happy because their ROI looks a little bit better, but you're paying for users that would have already came in your app anyways. So how do we solve this problem when there's unclear accountability across this ecosystem? And we see this problem continue to grow. We see the fraudsters get better and better at what they're doing. So here at AppsFlyer, because we're in this position where we have so much data, we track over 500 billion mobile interactions per month. What can we do to really push the envelope here and hold someone accountable? So we've built things internally. We like to look at ourselves as the Chuck Norris of fraud prevention. So fraud occurs across the user funnel way back in the archaic ages of mobile, around 4 to 5 years ago. You saw a lot of impression fraud where it's low-value fraud, just kind of simulating impressions and things like that, more for the brand advertising. But what we start to see more and more, and I'll highlight the top 3 types of fraud that we see today, is a lot of click fraud, obviously, and install fraud being the #1 type of fraud that we see as an attribution company. So click fraud, you got click hijacking, click flooding, which I'll go into in just a little bit, as well as CPA fraud as well. So as I mentioned, the fraudsters are able to simulate actual in-app events and retention and ROI as well. So what are the things that we can do to prevent the fraud? There's a certain amount of fraud that you can actually prevent in real time, and there's another piece where it's going to take some post-mortem. You got to know what to look for, and you got to know what to look for fast, because you want to make sure you're reallocating those budgets to networks and publishers within the networks, which is usually where the problem exists, that are actually driving real value. So you got to think in layers, and basically just reiterating on the point, know what you can prevent in real time, know what you need to look for from a detective measure as well. So these are some of the tools that you want to make sure your fraud solution that you're using has, and really good things to keep in mind before you start investing in UA as well. So very easy ones: validation, install and receive validation. Those are easy ones, and in most cases you can prevent those in real time. Filtering, rating, and blacklisting. So I don't think there's a fraud tool out there that doesn't buy third-party lists, blacklists of IP addresses, blacklists of devices. But what you'll find is the fraudsters can buy those same blacklists as well. So what do? You want to make sure you're with a solution that has not only great third-party data, but great first-party data as well. So with AppsFlyer, we're in a position where we have so much data, where we can actually build machine learning. And I hate saying that word because it's such a buzzword. Everyone hates it. AI, machine learning. What the hell is that? But it really requires, a constant flow of data to be able to really do machine learning, and that's something that most of the big attribution companies out there will have. You'll want to make sure that the company you're working with has device ID ratings and can actually not only just understand the bad IPs that are out there, but also as they continue to evolve, being able to detect those IP addresses, those bad devices, as they start coming in, and learn about those devices as well. Distribution modeling, so that's a fancy word for looking at anomalies in click to install time. But even a better term that I like to use is click to intent. So you know that if a user clicks on an ad, they're not going to wait 5 days to launch the app in most cases, unless they're burning their dinner and they had to run and the baby's crying and all this fancy stuff. But if you look at cohorts and groups of users that where they're all installing the app 5 days after the click, that's something to look into, and we'll get into some of the benchmarks that you'll want to keep in mind as well. And then again, there's certain things that you can prevent, there's certain things that you need to look at after the fact, and that's why it's great to have someone that's hands-on with this data, looking at it, making sure that you're not only investing with great networks that are driving return on your ad spend, but you're also making sure that there's certain publishers that you're actively looking at problematic publishers within networks that are driving fraud. So the key building blocks for fraud as we see it, I'll start with scale. So you want to make sure you're with a provider that has the scale, that is able to actually learn about the market. There's certain KPIs that we can look at having all these devices, where if we see a certain publisher within a network, or a certain network is driving 100% new devices, that's fraud. And then building technology on top of that, where obviously you can see fraud in the raw data, but how long does it take you to see it? So building good visuals and good graphical representations where you can act on this problem very quickly. And like I said, you can't prevent everything in real time, but you can prevent things a couple days after the fact. And then regulation. In a market where no one's really incentivized to fight fraud, we want to help push the boundary and make sure that we are incentivizing the advertiser to fight fraud. Make sure that the attribution provider you're working with is unbiased, and that's really key to all the revenue that we get comes from our advertisers, and that's how we like to keep it. So these are good benchmarks to write down, and this is what most of our partners' data looks like. If we looked at click to install time reports, make sure that you can look at it in seconds, hours, and days. So this is pretty normal. 75% of installs coming in within the first hour. 94% within the first 24 hours. This is pretty normal. So we'll start to look at the top 3 types of fraud that we see and how the data will look different. Click flooding. And I should say we have the picture of the network here. Usually it's certain sub-publishers that are actually attacking the network as well. So usually it's within the network. Well, you'll see that. Now I have a friend that loves to watch his Mets games, right, but doesn't want to pay for it. So he uses some sketchy app that he downloaded on a jailbroken device, and we find that bad app is stealing every single device information from all of their users, and they're pushing out 5 or 6 clicks a day from that device for the rest of eternity. So they're hoping to grab these unrelated downloads and hopefully make attributions on those installs depending on what the click to install look back window is. So you'll see that this is one way that fraudsters are trying to get organic installs. Organic installs are great, and when you can make an attribution on them, it's very bad, and it pollutes the ecosystem with bad data. This is what it looks like. I don't know about you guys, but whenever I click on an ad, I usually launch the app 5 or 6 days later. It sounds ridiculous, right? I mean, come on. So when you're starting to, launching the app 5 or 6 days later, maybe it's a storage issue on the phone. There's those anomalies that can happen. But when you start to see groups of these users come in that are all downloading the app 5 or 6 days later, this is a prime example of click flooding, and it's something you'll definitely want to explore. And you'll want to explore as granular as possible. So not just looking at the network and saying, well, this network is fraudulent. Look at this. Honestly, you go into the data and look at specific sub-publishers that are usually problematic in this case. So that's one of the top types of fraud that we see at AppsFlyer. The other is install hijacking. So this is going to look a lot different in the data in terms of the click to install time. So usually this comes from bad apps where they can insert malware in your device. They understand that, okay, you're now installing an app. They know that, and they can insert a click really quickly before that app is launched for the first time. Again, going after those organic users, because it's pretty easy to see when you drive 10,000 installs and none of them completed one event in your app. That's obviously shit traffic. But when you're starting to see traffic from organic users and that are actually engaging, again, it goes back to that prisoner's dilemma. And hopefully after this session, you're able to understand how to analyze this, what it looks like in these reports. So this is what it looks like, and this would probably be across an entire media source because you do see some normal traffic in here. But I welcome you to try it. Click on an ad, download the app, and try to launch it within the first 5 seconds. It's impossible to do. If you can do it, I'll give you $5. So there's a certain range of installs that you can prevent here. So maybe within the first 2-3 seconds you say, well, this is impossible. But maybe someone has some fantastic internet and they're, something crazy. So there's a range of what you can prevent here and what you can detect. But this is clearly install hijacking, where you're seeing thousands of installs come in where the click to install time is under 5 seconds. That is, without a doubt, fraud. How many of you have seen one of these or heard of one of these before? Device farms. Yeah, so these exist, and we see a lot of data here at AppsFlyer. This is honestly the #1 source of fraud that we've seen, and also one of the most difficult to detect. And that's when you have a bunch of devices that can, let's see, here we go. So they'll click on an ad, they'll download, maybe even engage with the app for a couple days, fake like 4 or 5 days of retention. Then they will reset their device ID and download the same app again. And there's clear ways to see this device, but it all really depends on going back to that scale, where you need to have a provider that, at the end of the day, if you're looking at your own data to prevent fraud, that's great. But if you can look at 60% of the entire advertising markets data, that is very, very impactful. And that's how you can prevent this type of fraud, which is the #1 type of fraud that we see here at AppsFlyer with these device ID marathons. You'll see a lot of groups of installs hiding behind limit ad tracking as well. And there's nothing wrong with new devices. There's nothing wrong with limit ad tracking. This occurs in the market. But when you see an entire group of users all from the same publisher, and they're all new devices, or they're all limit ad tracking, that's something to explore. So this is what we see. This is what it looks like in our dashboard with our fraud solution, and I think it looks pretty nice. So you see this is across a media source. You see that most of these installs are normal, but we're seeing that a specific media source, it has over 90 to 100% new devices. This is a metric that is very, very tough to get, and you want to make sure you're working with a provider that has the scale where they're able to see this many devices and able to come up with this metric, because the fraudsters are betting on the fact that you don't have this metric. So brings me to just to kind of conclude, there's a lot of things that you can prevent, a lot of things that you can detect. I hope that you've seen today the top 3 types of fraud that we see in our data. Obviously, work with your providers, work with your partners to understand what and emphasize what is the type of installs that we don't want to pay for, what does bad performance look like, and then what does fraud look like. In terms of AppsFlyer, we have products called like Device Rank, where we have over 98% of the devices rated. And if we see one bad device in our entire database, we block that and immunize our entire client base from that. So that's kind of taking forward action on this big problem that's harming the industry, and really incentivizing the advertiser to take action on this fraud and make sure they're not paying for organic users and things like that, and giving them metrics that they never had before, and really empower them to spend more. And we think that if we can help to solve this problem, there's going to be more trust, there's going to be more transparency in the industry, and that's what's going to increase ad budgets. Because at the end of the day, the legitimate networks will survive. And the data-savvy marketers will also survive as well. Cool. So if you have any questions, we have great glossary online of all the different things you'll want to know about mobile ad fraud before you get into UA, or if you're already experiencing some of these problems, you're seeing bad traffic come in. Feel free to check that out, or send me an email. I'm happy to answer specific questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's great.